Are you getting denials for claims related to animal bites and scratches? Well, there is a method to the madness here, and oftentimes it is a simple sequencing issue. Hey there, I'm Victoria. I'm a medical coder, auditor, educator, and content creator, and on my channel I provide tips, tricks, and tutorials to help you be successful in a medical coding career. Today I want to talk about animal bites and scratches and how we code for them. Specifically, I want to get more into the diagnosis coding portion of it because oftentimes a simple error on the diagnosis coding or sequencing can result in a lot of denials. So why do we have all these denials, right? So if you have, for example, an animal bite and you go into your ICD-10-CM alphabetic index and you look up bite, it's going to give you all kinds of different types of bites. They're broken down mostly by location, and then under that location it'll give you specifications of was it an animal bite or a superficial bite. For example, if you look under bite and then by hand, it will give you hand in either insect bite or superficial bite, and then of course the default for just general hand bite. However, that's not how most providers are looking up diagnosis codes, right? They're not flipping to the alphabetic index. That's what a coder does. They're going into their search tools in the electronic medical record, and they're probably searching for something like cat or insect. For example, if they search up dog bite, they might come up with W54.0XXA, which can't be used as a primary diagnosis code. Reason being is you could get bit by a dog and it doesn't pierce the skin. So the dog bite is more so the context of how it happened versus the actual injury itself. So what was that resulting injury? It was something like a puncture or maybe a laceration, and that was the actual injury. The dog bite's more so the context of it. So if you see a denial for something surrounding a bite or a scratch and it's one of those like W codes, think W for what else needs to go first in order to explain that medical necessity. You might also think W for wound. Let's look for a wound. So what was that resulting injury from that bite, from that scratch? Was it a laceration? Was it a puncture? Was it a wound? It might even be something like an infection or a fracture. Let's actually go through a couple of case examples. So for our first case study here, we have Sally. Sally was scratched by her pet cat, so that we have the type of animal. On the left forearm is our location, and it resulted in a 6-inch laceration. So that's our type of injury, is the laceration, right? It was cleaned and it was repaired with a 1-layer closure. The 1-layer closure is our procedure. So 1-layer closure. So what can we tell from just this little bit of the story? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to go and look for our laceration code, right? So this 6-inch laceration, we're going to find our S code here, S51.812A, laceration without foreign body of the left forearm, right? Left forearm laceration. That is our injury, but the context was that it was done by her pet cat. So we have another code here, our W5503XA, which is the scratched by a cat by the initial encounter. Now we need our procedure code as well. So how was this repaired? It was repaired with a 1-layer closure. So that we have is a simple repair, is a 1-layer closure. So that 1-layer closure will be our CPT code 12002. Simple repair of superficial wounds of scalp, neck, axilla, external genitalia, trunk, and or extremities. And that's what the forearm is. It's part of the extremities. And 2.6 centimeters to 7.5. So what was ours? It was a 6-inch. So it was a 6-inch repair, and that falls right into that area there. If we were to put that W code first, we might see a denial because, or if we just put that only the W code, we might get a denial because that's just telling us they were scratched by a cat, right? It's the injury that supports the medical necessity of this repair, the fact that there was a laceration. Our next case study here is Dave. Dave was bit by a spider on his right middle finger while weeding his garden. So what do we got here? We have right middle finger. We have some other information here. He was weeding his garden. So there are external cause codes for weeding your garden. We'll highlight that here in our red. Weeding his garden. And he has a small puncture wound. Where's that small puncture wound? It's on his right middle finger. Small puncture wound, right middle finger. He was instructed by his PCP to keep the area clean, apply a cold compress, and take over-the-counter pain medication as needed. The visit was of low medical decision making. So we have a couple of different diagnosis codes here, because what else do we have here? He was weeding his garden, it was on his right middle finger, it was a puncture wound, and it was by what? He was bitten by a spider, okay? So when we look at this, we have a couple of things. First and foremost, we want to code the injury, right? So the injury itself is going to be this puncture wound without foreign body of the right middle finger, without damage to the nail initial encounter. That's for the puncture wound, right? And we know it was also on the right middle finger. This W code is for the fact that it was a spider bite. What was that surrounding cause? Keep going back and forth. So bitten or stung by a non-venomous insect or other non-venomous arthropods. Initial encounter is the code that we will get there for the spider bite. We also have here an activity code if we want to use it, and that is activity gardening or landscaping for the fact that it was during weeding. And then we have our CPT code, the visit, so the office visit. And we're going to assume that since it was its PCP, it was an established patient visit. Visit was of low medical decision making, which makes it a CPT code 99213. Office or other outpatient visit for the evaluation and management of an established patient which requires a medically appropriate history and or examination with low medical decision making. So if the documentation didn't have the support for the fact that there was a puncture wound or the fact that it was gardening and we just had it was a spider bite and we just filled out that W code, it would have probably resulted in a denial, because was there a medical necessity that he had to have this office visit for the spider bite? Like, what was going on with the spider bite? Because you and I could get bit by a spider and there might not be an infection or bleeding. It might just be a tiny spider bite and nothing happened. We could get bit by a dog and it wouldn't necessarily punctured the skin. There would have been no wound, no laceration. So that code itself isn't going to support medical necessity. We need to paint that whole medical picture of, oh, there was a puncture wound. So that supports why we needed to come in for that office visit. All right, now that we've gone through some of the specifics, let's zoom out a little bit and look at the big picture. Every code tells a story, and even the sequencing of those codes can change that narrative that you're trying to tell to the insurance company. So to wrap this up, always look for the injury first. That's what we're going to want to sequence first to support the medical necessity for that service or procedure. And then we can add something like an external cause code, the why, what was the surrounding circumstance around that injury. And make sure you're as accurate as possible, especially with those 7th character extensions for the initial, the subsequent sequela, and those X placeholders. But the documentation has to drive it all. So if the documentation by the provider doesn't clarify what type of injury it is, always go back to make sure that you are getting the clear documentation provided. But of course, diligence on the front end can save a lot of that back and forth. Stay sharp, keep learning, work with your providers, and you can avoid those pesky denials. That's all for today, but if you have more types of coding scenarios you would like me to cover, definitely let me know in the comments below. I do love hearing from you guys. But for now, just keep on coding on.